When you work with data in your application, you want to look for ways to store this data permanently, because once the application is off, the data is gone, because it's not stored somewhere permanent. One of many ways to permanently store data is using files. In any programming language, you create and open files to store data inside it. In C++, we will take a look at how we can store data inside a text file. To be able to use the functionalities that allows us to read and write on files, let us learn a few terminologies. Ofstream is a type that allows us to write data to a file. Ifstream is a type that allows us to read from a file. Fstream is the general type. It combines Ofstream and Ifstream. Now let's talk about the modes that we will use in this video. Let's start with the modes of Ofstream. iOS out, this adds data and overrides existing data. iOS app, this also adds data but to the end of the file. And now for Ifstream, we will use iOS in, which is used to extract data from a file. And at the end of this video, let's combine all of this using Fstream. Now, in order to use these three types, we need to go ahead and include a library called Fstream, or a header file called Fstream, like this. And this header file called Fstream will provide us with Ofstream, with Ifstream, like this, and with the general type called Fstream. So Ofstream is used for writing, Ifstream is used for reading, and Fstream is used for both Ofstream and Ifstream combined. Now let's start with how to write something to a file. To do this, we need to use Ofstream. And so I'm going to create an object of type Ofstream, like this. Now inside, I want to pass a couple of parameters to the constructor. The first one will be the file name. So I will say file.txt. Now if this file does not exist in my directory, what will happen is that C++ will create this file and open it. Otherwise, if it does exist, then it will simply open it. Now after it, we need to use the modes, or I need to specify a flag for my Ofstream object. Now I told you about iOS app and iOS out. Let's start with iOS out, like this. This one is used to add data to a text file. Also, iOS app is also used to add data to a text file, but there is a slight difference between those two. We will see them later on. Now, it is always a best practice to check if the file was created properly. So, by saying if not file, I'm checking if this file was not created properly or was not successfully opened. What I want to do is I want to see out an error, for example, like this, and I could simply go ahead and terminate my program, like this, okay? Otherwise, the file was successfully created and opened. Now let's go ahead and receive some inputs from the user. I want to start by receiving name and age from the user. So I'm going to say cout input name. I want to receive input, and this input will be stored inside the name variable, and another input which will be input age, and this one will be stored inside the age variable. Now I want to receive those inputs, but once I receive them, I want to store them inside my file. How to do this? Well, basically I could use my file object, my Ofstream object, and using the insertion operator, which is familiar to you because we use this insertion operator with cout, but in the context of files, when you use the insertion operator, you are saying I want to insert this data inside my file. So I want to basically right now insert a data inside my file. So I'm going to say file insert name, then insert after it a white space, then insert after it age, and after it insert a new line. So what I'm doing here is I'm saving my data inside my file. Now let's go ahead and run this code to see what will happen. Now let's go ahead input name, but before that you can see right here that the file.txt was created. Okay, now let's go ahead and input something. So I'll say John Smith like this, and let's say age is 34. Alright, nothing happened. Let's go ahead and see what happened in our file, and as you can see, input was actually given right here. Now, what's so special about iOS out? If I go ahead and rerun my program, let's say I want to give David Smith, for example, and 35, like this. Let me go now to my file. As you can see, the previous data was overridden. So basically, when you use iOS out, it will override the previous data with the new data. However, if you don't want that, you need to make sure to use iOS app. It doesn't override the previous data, rather it adds a new data at the next line. So let's go ahead and try it out. If I go ahead, compile again my file and launch, let's say I want to say John Smith again, and John's is 34. Now let's go to my file and see what will happen. As you can see, using iOS app, we could append or add data to our file without overriding previous data. Now that we know how to write something to a file, let's go ahead and discover how we could read from a file. So instead of Ofstream object, I want to use an Ifstream object like this. I'm going to name it also file, and I should also open my txt file, the file that I want to read. Now the mode for an Ifstream object will be iOS_in. This is used to read something from a file. Now again, let's go ahead and put the if statement to make sure that we check if this file was not successfully created, and we want to make sure that we go ahead and exit from the file from our program if this file was not successfully created or opened. After this, I want to go ahead and read from a file. But let's go ahead and discover a few ways to actually read from a file. The first method is the following. I want to go ahead and, first of all, because inside my file I have name and age, that means I need to use two variables, name and age. So I have this chunk, this is a first chunk, and this is the second one. White space is ignored. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say string name and int age. These will be my temporary variables to store my data. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the Ifstream object and using the extraction operator, which is also familiar to you because we use it in cin. But in the context of files, when you say file, when you say the extraction operator here, you mean that you want to extract something from your file. So you want to extract data. Now what I'm going to say extract for me a data and place it inside name, and also extract another data and place it inside age. So what's happening here is that the cursor of the file starts always at the beginning. It will read this data right here, David Smith, until it reaches this white space. It will take this data and put it inside name. Now it will continue after the white space and will read this data. Once it's done, it will put it inside age. And it will go to a new line and it will repeat it. Now, in our case, we don't have a loop to repeat it, but that's okay. I just want to show you first of all what will happen. So if I go ahead, compile my file like this and launch, as you can see, nothing happened because, because I didn't say cout name. I didn't print those variables. Okay, so I need to print these variables first in order to see what we got inside them. So age here and age like this. Okay, now let's go ahead again, compile my file and launch. As you can see, name is David Smith, age is 35. Now, in order to loop through all my files, I need to put this inside a while loop. So I need to repeat this statement. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to say while, and what will be the condition of my while loop? This will be the condition of my while loop. Why? Because when you put this as a condition inside your while loop, you're basically saying, as long as there is data to extract, or as long as the cursor doesn't reach the end of the file, make sure to extract data and place them inside these variables. Now, inside the while loop, or the block of the while loop, I want to simply print these data like this. And so right now, if I go ahead, compile my file, and then launch, as you can see, I could get all of those data from my file. Now, this is the first way. The second way is using a function called getLine. Now, getLine is a function that belongs to a string header file. So I'm going to include string. Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this. And why am I going to use getLine? Well, basically, if I use the function getLine in the context of files, what I'll be able to do is I'll be able to read a whole line. So let's go ahead and see it. Basically, if I say string line like this, I want to create a variable called string line. Now, if I say getLine, file and line, what I'm doing here is that I am reading a full line from my file like this. I'm getting it all and I'm putting it inside the line variable. Now, what happens if I go ahead, cut this and paste it as a condition to my while loop like this? What this happens right now is that I'm saying as long as the cursor doesn't arrive to the end of the file, make sure to get a line from my file and put it inside the line variable. Now what I'm going to do with this line variable is I'm going to simply print it at each iteration. Now let's go ahead and see it. So if I compile and then launch, as you can see, I got a full line and I print it at each iteration. Now let's go ahead and learn about Fstream. So Fstream is the general type of Ofstream and Ifstream, so it combines both of them. We could read and write with using an Fstream object. So I'll name my object file again like this, and now I need to pass a couple of parameters. First will be the file name, and next will be the mode. Because we're using Fstream, we need to combine reading and writing modes or flags. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say iOS app. This is to read, or write, and I'll use the OR operator and use iOS_in. I am combining reading and writing. Now let's go ahead again and put the if block right here. So if the file was not successfully created or opened, I'm going to print a error like this. So C error like this and return -1 to exit from my file. Otherwise, let's go ahead and do some operations. What I want to do first is I want to allow the user to keep on adding some input. I'm going to say while true like this, and I'm going to say string name and int age like this, int age like this. So I want to allow the user to actually input a name as long as they want. So input name and -1 to exit like this. Okay, I'm going to say cin name and I'm going to check if name is equal to -1. I want to make sure to break out of the loop like this. Otherwise, let's go ahead and continue, receive an input for the age like this, and I will say cin age like this. Okay, once that is done, I'm going to go ahead and insert those inputs inside my file. So I'm going to say file, insertion operator, name, white space, age, and L like this. Okay, now once I wrote my data inside my file, what I want to do after it is I want to read those data, I want to extract them and put them inside a vector. So a vector is simply a growable array which you can use, and you say include vector in order to import the vector type. Now what I'm going to do here after it is I want to read my data from my file. Now let's go ahead and see how. What I will do is I'll use the second method. I want to read a full line. So I'm going to say while get line like this, file and line. I'm going to go ahead, create a line variable again as we did before. So string line like this in order to store each line of my file inside this variable. Next, I'm going to go ahead and create a vector of strings like this, and I'll call it data, for example. Now at each iteration, I want to go ahead and say data.pushback. It's a function inside the vector class in order to push a data or append data to my vector. And after it, I want to print my vector. So for int I equal to 0, I less than data.size, I plus plus, and now let's say cout data index I like this, and end L like this. Let's go ahead and see what will happen with our code. Now let's go ahead and put a name. Let's say Charlie Smith like this, and Charlie is 36. Let's say -1, but we didn't got any printing or cout from this one. What's the problem? Well, first of all, we could see that Charlie was actually inserted inside our file. But the thing is that once you use the iOS app, this flag right here, this flag always points to the end of the file. Always points there. Because why? It should point actually there because once you add a new data, it should add it at the end of the file. But once we arrive to this block of code right here, the cursor of the file is already at the end. So when we want to read something from this file, the cursor is already right here. So it's already pointing to the end of the file. That is why this condition evaluated false. What we need to do is once we finish writing to our file, we need to change the position of our cursor. How to do this? Well, there is actually two functions to do this. If I say file.seek, G or P, as you can see, there's those two functions. Now, what's the difference? Actually, those two functions are similar to each other. The seek P right here is a function that is used to change the location of the cursor, but it's only used for an Ofstream object. And seek P right here does the same thing as, the seek G right here does the same thing as seek P, but it's used for an Ifstream object, okay? Now, why does the Fstream object have them both? Because it's a combination of Ofstream and Ifstream. Now, it doesn't matter which one you use. I'm going to use seek P for now because I just want to change the location, or I want to change where my pointer or the cursor points at. So instead of pointing right here, I want it to point at the beginning. How should I do this? Well, I could say seek P 0 iOS beg or begin. So what I'm saying here is I'm saying I want my cursor to start at the beginning. I wanted my cursor to point at the beginning. If I say, for example, iOS end, I'm saying that I want my cursor to point at the end. But I don't want that, so I want it to point at the beginning. Now let's go ahead and try it out. So if I go ahead, first of all, clear the interface and now compile and run my code. Let's say, I don't know, Jason Smith, for example. Jason's 56. Let's say -1. As you can see, now it works properly. We were able to print the data inside our vector. Well, we first of all extracted our data from our file right here. We placed them inside this vector data structure, and then we simply print this vector. And this is it about how you can store data inside files. So files are definitely one of many ways to store data permanently, but definitely they're not efficient. There's much better ways to store, retrieve, and manage data more efficiently. And this is it for this video. Make sure to subscribe to stay up to date for the next C++ tutorial video.